Supply and demand won't solve the housing crisis. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian here and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Grab your stein of, hashtag not sponsored cheap coffee. I came from church, got myself a coffee on the way home and I'm doing my recording now, so that's why. And let's check out this article because it's discussing something interesting about the housing issues. And this is in other parts of the world, but they're the same everywhere, really. You know, Canada, Australia, a lot of the Commonwealth nations have the same issues, funny enough. But supply and demand considerations alone won't solve housing. Now, I've been arguing for some time that supply is one of the fundamental issues. And the challenge is actually meeting that supply requirement, supplying enough housing to meet demand. Now, demand is continuing to go up because our population here in Australia is growing significantly due to people migrating here to Australia. And, well, here's the thing, guys. As much as people love to bitch and moan about Australia, and that could be because of our Pommy heritage, look at what's happening over in Israel and Palestine right now. Look at the shit that's going on over there. Australia is a safe, boring, stable society. And that's attractive to a lot of people. So you've got to bear that in mind. That's one of the things why people from all over the world want to come to our nice little boring corner of the world and, live a peaceful life. That can't be underestimated how important that is. So that's why demand is going to be there. It's not going to disappear. Okay? So looking at things like wages and relating that to housing, okay, sure, it's not as affordable as it was using that metric in the past. But it's not as bad as people are making out because now you need to have a household has two incomes, where in the past it only had one. So you got to, it's not as bad. It's still frustrating, but not as terrifying as people like to play up. So let's have a look at this. This is from the Daily Hive, urbanized by David Finn. So, building more houses and prices will fall. It's the law of supply and demand economics, or Econ 101. And any economist will tell you so. Yeah, I mean, you'd hope so. You'd hope so if there's more stock on the market. But, I mean, he is right. It's not just that. There's other challenges. Here in Australia, we've got legislation changes that are constantly adding more onerous requirements onto our homes. A home that a boomer bought for a lot cheaper was not as luxurious as the homes that we get now. So you can use, I'm reading a book, looking at it, someone bought a house in Ballarat for 44 grand. There's no, and I'm thinking, that's bullshit. But then you look at what they actually bought. It's different, guys. Anyway, attempts to suggest otherwise are akin to defying gravity or claiming the earth is flat. At least that seems to be the claim. I'm a strong believer in both gravity and a basketball-shaped planet Earth, but with housing, it's a different story. At the same time, I want to be clear, this is not a screed about the evils of development or supply. We do need developers and we need supply, but the simple claim that housing is subject to the very same laws of supply and demand as anything else is just not born out of reality. Yeah, well, how would I would agree in some regards, because, so much of our market is regulated, controlled, manipulated, and influenced by the state. I mean, housing affordability is supercharged by interest rate cuts, super being handed out, forced savings. If we only build more, prices will fall. They have to, because when you have more of something, it mitigates demand and makes prices go down, not up. This is a principal argument of housing supply activists who would tell you that this is how we get to the holy grail of affordability. It works the same for cars, apples, bananas, whatever commodity you can think of, because that's Econ 101, except it isn't. You know what's gotten really cheap over the last few decades? In my lifetime, and I'm not that old, I look it, but I'm 40. Actually, no, I'm 40. Early 40s. What I'm recording with right now. Got my Logitech camera right there. I've got 4 screens in front of me. I've got a Rode microphone and all this other equipment here. I bought a laptop end of financial year for because my desktop was just getting too old and too unreliable. It was crashing too much. So I thought, stuff it. I'm just getting a laptop. I had a deadline. Went and bought one at Umart, $2,500. And what the power of that machine compared to what I could have gotten years ago is just crazy. It's just nuts. Even this one down here that I have, it only has a 3060 NVIDIA graphics card. This one came with a 4070 laptop one. It's crazy. It can do all the rendering, everything that I need as an architect. For what, $2,500? That was, I think, the first computer my father bought in the 80s was an old 286. I think it would have cost $2,000 to $3,000. So you can see there's a sector where prices have cratered. Affordability has skyrocketed. Compare that to other sectors where the government's involved. One perfect example is the education sector in the US. Look at that. It's just a joke. You know, they've guaranteed everyone loans. No, you can't bankrupt out of them. If you want to make education more affordable in the US, let people bankrupt out of their student loans and make the universities cop that cost. Anyway, most commodities do react to supply variables, but with housing, there are so many contributing external factors that are unique to housing that do not apply to other goods. For instance, the impact of land lift, building and material marketing to investors, using homes for short-term rentals instead of supplying homes for locals, and especially the fact that developers do not want to build in a falling market. The last thing is key because it means that if developers build enough to cause prices to fall, the investment thesis falls apart. And so many will cease to continue building. We see this playing out right now despite the need for supply. Every project needs to pencil. That is, they need to be profitable to justify the investment. These things don't happen with, say, bananas. To quote, well, maybe that's why you call for state massive housing construction. But see, here's the thing, they're not going to do that. Either side of politics aren't going to do it. They aren't going to massively roll out housing. Look at Labor's 1 million houses target, 1.2 million houses target. It's going to be very difficult to achieve that. To quote University of British Columbia economics professor and housing activist Tom Davidoff, Econ 101 tells us that if there are more bananas, the price of bananas goes down. That is true. But Davidoff insists the same applies to housing. Vancouver has seen a huge increase in rental construction, which way have rental costs gone? This summer, a one-bedroom average rent hit a record high of over $3,000 a month. And that's Canadian dollars. What's the Canadian? Hang on, Canada dollar to AUD. What's the exchange rate right now? While that loads up, I'll let you know. Okay, $1.15. So one Canadian dollar is $1.15 Australian. So there you go, guys. So that's over $3,000 Australian, isn't it? So 3,000 times 1.15, $3,500. $3,500 for a one bedder. Oh yeah, Brisbane probably isn't that far. That's a lot. What's that a week? Let's look at that a week. Divide it by 4. Oh shit. Divide it by 2. You got a couple there. $431 each. Damn. When I was a student, I managed to get away $55 a week in a shared house, a dump. Oh, and we're talking 20 years ago. Anyway, how do interest rates impact bananas? Are there limited banana workers, which make it harder to find necessary labor and so drive up production costs? What developers do when prices are falling? And what if you supply mostly very thin bananas when people strive for large bananas? What happens to the price of the limited but very sought after larger bananas? Does more supply of small bananas make larger bananas fall in price or go up? If the land used to grow those larger bananas gets used for growing smaller bananas, even fewer large bananas are produced, which of course makes them even more expensive, not less. The banana analogy is getting tiresome, but if you'll forgive just one more, what would happen if banana growers grew a type of banana that was marketed primarily to international investors? rather than hungry local people. Investors would sell or lend the bananas to the hungry people, but at inflated prices, or just store the bananas so no one gets to eat them. These are all material reasons why Econ 101 does not apply the same way to houses. A telling scenario in Vancouver, when the city removed the burden of the empty homes tax on new builds because developers lobbied. They have the units built, but they don't want to sell them at the current lower market rates today. They want to be allowed to keep them sitting empty so they can wait for prices to recover. You could not have a more literal example of how developers will resist reacting to the market by lowering prices, even if it means holding the units empty for a year or two. The same thing is happening with private sellers. It's a very low inventory for sale because sellers deem this point in time is not a great time to sell, so they don't. Well, that's an individual choice. If you can afford to do that, if you can afford the carrying cost for that, of course people are going to do that. No different with any other asset. This is why housing is not subject to the simple rules of supply and demand, or as it is referred to, Econ 101. Okay, so he makes some really interesting points here, some good arguments, but here's the thing. It is affected by supply and demand, and we'll discuss how it is. So, banana analogy is terrible. It's not appropriate. You need to look at something else. What is an asset that you could store and hold on to with a holding cost, and you can choose to sell when you want? Banana, you can't. They've got a shelf life. There's going to be a point where that it will expire and you have to throw it away. What about precious metals? People who are buying their silver, gold, or other metals, hoarding it as a store of wealth, and then they'd sell it when they choose to. Sure, in the US, I don't can you even buy gold anymore in the US. I know they confiscated it all, but you know what I mean. I recently sold some silver because I wanted to invest in some dividend shares. I was getting sick of not getting any dividends. And that was, I had to bear that holding cost. I had to hold on to the asset, but it was my right to choose when to sell it. Same thing here with development. These developers have enough money to hold. They have to hold on to the property. They have to maintain it. It might be good because any of the defects that appear within those 2 years, they'll be able to identify. So if you start getting water leaks and all of these issues, well, the developer still holds the property because they were too greedy to sell it. So they'll have to fix it. If you start seeing cracks within those 2 years because the foundations were shoddy, the developer has that problem. They have to deal with it or they're not going to be able to sell it. So, while you're claiming that it's a bad thing, I could make an argument that it's a good thing. Maybe we need to make all builders all developments have a run-in period for a few years. Like we were working on some big jobs, some big mining projects, and Bechtel would get it all up to speed and would run the mine for a year or the facilities and then hand it over, all working and operating. So they'd break everything again. They'd know what it's all like. They'd find any issues. There's an argument for doing that here. If the developers can't afford, if they go bankrupt, then they'll have to sell. So then you'll have more people or more property going on the market. The problem is demand is just too high. It's much too high to the supply. The curve is way outset. And there are so many other factors that are affecting it that probably would have more influence on supply and demand. That's one argument I'd agree with here. What about NIMBYism? What about financial incentives? What about people intentionally buying properties at a loss to negative gear them because we pay so much tax everywhere else? It's not going to get any easier, guys. So what do you reckon? Do you think it's a good argument here? Or do you think it could go either way? Let me know your take on it in the comments below. But I thought it was quite interesting. A few good points, but I don't know about bananas being the appropriate comparison. Anyway, thanks for watching. Let me know your opinions down below. Check out Heise a bit more Heise does if you want to see other content I create. If you want to support us, you can on YouTube or Patreon. Use the referral links, buy my pocket squares, or call me if you need an architect. Take care. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.